And let's bring in our panel to weigh in on some of the big stories that we are talking about. President Trump also writing on Truth Social that China should open its market to the United States would be so good for them. Pleased to have today with us Rick Gates. He's the author of the book Wicked Game, former Trump campaign aide as well, and Gordon Chang, the author of Plan Red, China's Project to Destroy America. He's also a member of the CPAC board. Great to see you both.
Good afternoon.
Thank you, Bianca.
Let's start with China. Okay, big trade deal with the UK. China we knew would be harder, but perhaps Switzerland will be the breakthrough. I want to put up one of your posts on social media, Gordon. You say China's economy has almost passed the point of no return. Xi is in trouble. Even if he's standing next to Putin, you know, looking tough, putting out optics for his domestic audience. With President Trump now signaling perhaps going to 80%, do you think we'll walk away in 48 hours after this and potentially have a deal, stunning a lot of the American media who didn't think this was possible?
Well, it's possible. I mean, we can always make a preemptive concession and therefore get a deal. And American presidents have done that in the past. We just heard President Trump saying he'd like to have China open up its economy. Well, yes, of course we would. And we've been saying that for decades. And the Chinese say, oh, yes, of course we're opening up our economy. And the U.S. makes more concessions. The Chinese economy is closed because Xi Jinping is preparing for war. And he does not believe in consumption as the fundamental basis of the Chinese economy. So we can say this all we want, but let's not kid ourselves. This isn't going to happen until the Communist Party falls, because the nature of the Chinese economy is inherent in the Chinese Communist Party political system.
Preparing for war and signaling to the world, Rick, indeed, when he stood next to Vladimir Putin, that they are going to even strengthen their friendship. Again, I said, you know, domestic audience, they're playing, they have to project strength. President Trump, meantime, also in the administration, putting a little bit of pressure on with the potential of sanctions now. And we heard from Germany's new chancellor, who supports the Trump plan for a 30-day ceasefire between Russia and Ukraine, and adds they may face sanctions with Russia. And that's a key monetary thing for Russia because Europe is buying their gas, their oil. Your reaction to how this is moving pretty quickly, potentially to work towards a ceasefire now with the economic sanctions really being on the table?
Yeah, look, I think this is an indication of how President Trump has framed resolving the Ukraine-Russia conflict. And I think this is very important because the president has always said, if we can't get to a peace agreement, then we're going to have to do something more forceful to get these two countries to come together and resolve the differences. And sanctions has always been on the table. Now, I think the difference is, and I'm a big believer that sanctions typically don't work, particularly with countries like Russia and China, where they're able to weather it. But in this case, what the president is proposing, and then what you're seeing from our European allies, is that it's going to be a massive collective list of sanctions that go on Russia, you know, kind of simultaneously. So I think it will absolutely decimate what's left of their economy. I think this is exactly why you're seeing President Xi propping up President Putin in Russia to try to show that there is some semblance of an alliance between these two countries, because I think at any stage, these economies collectively are going to be hurt by any sort of sanctions. And I think Germany is putting the icing on the cake because obviously they've been supportive of Russia in this process. So the fact that Germany has now come around and said, yeah, we're with the US, we're with our other allies, that's an important step.
It certainly is. And, you know, all of this is connected. Russia, China goes back to not just economic, national security as well. You know, Gordon, when we widen out and we look at all of the things happening, Xi potentially is in some political trouble of his own, and Russia's got to be looking at that as well and saying they've been supporting us. So if something happens with China, it's not a boon to Putin, and obviously that could force potentially more towards the ceasefire, is what Rick was just saying. We could actually have a peace deal. Again, President Trump, the one making this happen.
Yeah, China is fueling these wars. It's fueling the war in Ukraine. It is fueling Iran's assault on Israel, and it's helping Pakistan in what could end up being a war with India. And in addition to that, Russia and China are fueling insurgencies in North Africa that look like wars. So if we want peace, what we should be doing is preventing money from going into China, and that's trade and investment. We do that, China will not have the resources to destabilize the world. And as we see wars
Right.
spread around the world, we're very close to what could be global conflict.
You know, you're right, especially with India and Pakistan flaring up. But yet you'll have legacy media just saying, oh, well, people won't be able to get dolls. I mean, Rick, when you hear Gordon and the gravity of the situation here, right, and why this is so important to decouple from China on a myriad of, levels here. We also saw what's going on with Pete Hegseth canceling his trip to Israel. It may signal something here. We're not sure. President Trump's also going over to the Middle East. He's teased this big announcement that he's making. We may hear on Monday. But Gaza is another situation right now, very volatile, very uncertain. We know that they are going to go in and eradicate Hamas. And President Trump over in the Middle East has strategic partnerships and meetings with Saudi Arabia, people who also want to see Iran, taken off, never getting a nuclear weapon. Saudi Arabia has been fighting with the Houthis for 12 years in their backyard of Yemen.
Yeah, look, I think the president has done an amazing job of trying to reduce the amount of global conflicts that have certainly, arisen during the Biden administration. And what you're seeing, with Pete Hegseth canceling Israel, by the way, that's really a non-issue. He's going to be attending the meetings with President Trump in the region. That's the importance of showing how much President Trump wants to resolve the issues in the Middle East, because they do. I think, the point Gordon made, and I want to expand on it, is that we're not just looking at isolated events. You're not just looking at India, Pakistan, Russia, Ukraine. What you're seeing is a complete change in the global paradigm of economics, of military power. And President Trump is doing as much as he can and really pushing that agenda to make sure that a different world order comes about, particularly economically. And that's why I don't think the media is giving him any ability to allow him to implement that agenda. Judge him, but judge him later. Give him a chance. Let's see how these tariff deals work. Let's see how these ceasefire deals work. Let's see what happens with India, Pakistan, Iran. But yeah, most importantly, we've got to deal with China. So on one hand, I hope we can come to some sort of resolution, but Gordon makes some very valid points. You can't trust China. You can't give in to them. So it'll be very interesting to see what the actual outcome of this meeting is in Switzerland this weekend.
Absolutely. And I think China also knows that this is a pivotal point for them and potentially for Xi and his future as well. Rick Gates, Gordon Chang, thanks, guys. Good to see you both on a Friday.
Have a good weekend.
Thank you so much.